Yes, so being versus doing Giraffe. So a lot of learners, I imagine, when they first start to learn about nonviolent communication, maybe with a little bit of fixation just on the steps of observation, feeling, need, and request, and a few of the diagrams and the process, then we end up focusing almost exclusively on doing the part without paying much attention to the underlying philosophy. So yeah, it would be useful to helpful to focus more on the underlying philosophy and to check in with ourselves and to see our intention. Does that resonate? Would you like to add anything, Dan?
Absolutely. So a lot of people, when they're getting started with nonviolent communication, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to really implement. And so some people, they do the best they can, right? We all do the best we can. And so, when we see, okay, there's these things that we can do. Well, first we talk about observations and feelings and needs and requests, and so it can be a bit overwhelming. So some people, they just stick to kind of following a formula or a list and going one step at a time. Whereas another way is if you really integrate the philosophy into your being, then you don't need to bother memorizing anything. It's just coming from you and who you are. And so, if you're just sort of doing NVC just mechanically, then your intention might not be behind what you're saying, and so it'll come across. It could come across the wrong way to people who you're interacting with. They might kind of question where you're coming from. Why are you talking like this? When it doesn't seem quite as authentic. Whereas if you're speaking in a way that's in congruence with your philosophy, then it'll come out a lot more naturally. And then you don't even need to worry about, which words you use or the order in which you say things. It'll just be a natural part of who you are.
Wonderful. So yeah, so you are also kind of confirming your agreement that is the focus on the philosophy is more helpful, and it kind of possibly renders remembering the steps, the procedure, etc. Much less important. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so for example, part of that, one example of that philosophy is that there's nothing that we should do or shouldn't do. It's about what we can do that supports needs or doesn't support needs. And so we want to have a sense of how our behaviors influence the needs of other people. So we just have this different sort of perspective on things, and it kind of shifts how we see the world.
Wonderful. So yeah, that's kind of one bit of the philosophy about transcending should and shouldn't and focusing on the needs. And let me see something else. And it's about kind of checking with the intention. And if I kind of reconstruct from our many hours of you coaching me, and then it's the importance of when we connect with someone, is very helpful to connect with the intention to connect with what are alive in both me and the speaker in terms of our feelings and needs, and to focus on the magical power that I can offer to make life wonderful with the together with the other person, and then exploring different strategy. Does that resonate?
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. So if your intention is to really connect with another person, to really sense what's life like for this other person as I'm talking with them, if that's your real intention, then it's going to show no matter what words you use. It's not about the words, it's about where you're coming from.
Wonderful. And a third point that of the philosophy that I've really started to integrate lately is, in essence, the philosophy of determinism, in the sense that we all do the best we can given our past experience, given our personality, and all the kind of other context. And whatever strategy that we have chosen was meeting our needs the most at that time. So this allows us to relax and then just to accept and then just to go beyond blaming and saying right or wrong. And it does really help. Is that
Yeah, that's another piece of philosophy, and that really goes to any kind of blame or judgment against either ourselves or other people for what we or others have done in the past. So, we all do things that eventually we come to regret. Similarly, other people, if we're connected with others, then we'll see someone do something that we'll feel upset about, and then remembering that, hey, you know what, we were just doing the best we could, they were doing the best we could, and now that we can communicate about, well, hey, that one thing that you did, I didn't like it, here's why. Or we can say, looking back at this thing that I did, I can imagine it didn't sit well with you. So we can have a conversation about this to find out, well, what can we do about the future? How can we, shift our behaviors such that we're behaving in a way that's all the more in harmony with the needs of the people who we're spending our time with?
yes, I hear that. And something that hasn't quite clicked in my mind is if I take in the premises of determinism, how does it apply to the future? And then where is the freedom? Where is the choice? Uh, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. Well, so I sometimes I bring up determinism when it comes to people either having regrets or about their own actions, or have some frustrations about other people's action. Once in a while, I'll bring up the idea of determinism to show people that we're all just here doing the best we can, and we couldn't help but do anything else, because our state of being in that moment when we decided to do that thing, or the other person decided to do that thing, our state of being was such that that was the only thing that we could have done, because that was the one strategy that we saw that would best serve our needs. Now, whether it actually was the best to serve our needs or not, well, that's for to be determined in the future. Now, speaking of the future, determinism, sure. Yeah, I don't really use determinism all that much when it comes to taking a look at our future. Um, if you got into the philosophy, a little bit more, which I'm not all that fluent in. So let's see here. You could suggest that, so in this moment, I'm choosing to do what I sense to be in all the most harmony with my needs. And in the next moment the same, the next moment the same. So I'm sort of, I see the world playing out in a deterministic sort of way. I think it's called soft determinism, though, with respect to quantum mechanics. Really, I don't know so much about this. I'm not so fluent in this, and I'm not really sure if determinism with respect to the future. I'm not really sure what kind of role it plays with nonviolent communication and using it and living it. How about you? Do you have any?
Yes, I do have an idea, and then my current stand is that it is quite helpful, as you said, about looking at regret, when involving other people with ourselves, to consider the premises um, of determinism. Just kind of, that we couldn't have done something else effectively, given the context and the past experience. However, I like to imagine free will. I like to imagine that I have free will right now, so that I can do something about the future. So it's some sort of dichotomy. It doesn't really work out in my mind intellectually, but it is very helpful for me. It gives me a sense of hope. It gives me a sense of agency. Then, yeah, so far I literally just have a dichotomy: determinism for the past and free will for the future.
Um, sure. Well, um, if we were talking philosophy, I could go into more depths about that. But I think we want to talk about NVC right now.
Yes. So
Sure.
coming back to NVC land. So yes, the shouldn't. That was point number one, and then kind of the intention of making life more wonderful for all parties involved. That's number two. And then what other kind of central philosophical point where would you add? And kind of this we all do the best that we can, kind of soft determinism for the past thing. This was the 3 points that we have addressed.
Sure. So the perspective that we're taking when we're using NVC is very objective, really leaving all subjectiveness behind. And so, for example, we speak of what actually happens versus what we think about what happens. For example, you could evaluate what you're saying and speak of a conversation as an argument or a heated debate. Or you could speak of, well, what words were spoken. That is a lot more accurate and objective and could be agreed upon by virtually everyone in the world. Whereas whether it was an argument or a debate or whatever contemptuous kind of discussion, or others would call it a conversation, depending on what culture you're from and your background and things. So, right, every sort of label that you could think of, like lazy, for example. Is the person lazy? Well, that's more an attribute that we're putting on them based on our perception of the other person, based on our conditioning, and it's very subjective. It's completely subjective. Whereas what would be more objective would be to say something like, well, that person I saw watching television, I know that they were watching television, 8 hours today. That person hasn't gotten up from the couch for 8 hours in the day. Now, so that's actually what happened, whereas lazy would be more of a subjective evaluation. So in nonviolent communication, we stick to what's objectively the case.
Yes, kind of focusing on the objective reality, and then it sounds like you are explaining kind of the first step of the 4 stages, the observation, the helpfulness of observing reality without judgment. Is that
right? And then also, well, why bother doing that? So when you see people interacting with each other and they're speaking of all kinds of judgments, they're saying, hey, you're such a this, and that action was so whatever of you to do, then that's very easy to provoke arguments and conflict and things. So because there's when we're working with subjective things, there's room for disagreement.
Yes.
Whereas if we're using objective truths, then it's simply what happened, and there's no room for argument, and we can speak about what happened and how that influenced us and our state of being, and so then we can have a conversation together about how we can resolve this and how we can work things out for the future.
Wonderful. Yes. So the way I like to see it is like I don't know, the analogy that I've been working with in my mind is like in the courtroom when we want to submit evidence, we give them as objectively as possible. If we say that someone is lazy, this is not exactly something submissible in the case file because this is not falsifiable effectively, because it's very subjective. Whereas we say someone did this at this time, and then there were witness and both person and then some evidence based on some artifacts, and then that is completely different, and then that is much more constructive for examining a case.
Yeah, absolutely. So one way to think of it, when you're speaking with someone and talking about something that happened that you don't like, then you can speak as if you were in court. and to an extent, speaking of what actually happened as opposed to your opinion about what happened. And because it's all the more constructive. You can take it, you can really work with it. Whereas if you're just speaking about your opinion about the other person, your judgments about them, calling them names and things, that I really don't think it's all that likely for that kind of conversation to lead to any kind of resolution, amicable resolution.
Great. It seems, yeah. Is there anything else you want to mention about this point before we say bye-bye for these segments of this video? Anything else about being giraffe versus doing giraffe?
Well, I could give other examples, but I'm happy closing the conversation right now.
Great. So yeah, in the next video, we'll talk about giraffe honesty versus jackal honesty. So until next time. So yes, you can find out that at danrona.com, DANRONA.com.
All
Until
right,
next
thanks.
time.
Take care.